Members, today I bring an amendment to you based upon what my experience has been since we left this body last year. As I was visiting with school board members, superintendents, parents, all across my district and around the state regarding bullying or anti-bullying, there's something that everyone agrees with. And that is no student should be bullied. Actually, no one should be bullied. And how do we best make sure that children, students are safe and secure in our schools and able to learn and maximize their potential? And having safe schools is one way to do that. But there's something else that kept coming up about the legislation that was being proposed. And no matter what news article you read about the bill that's on the floor today, the Safe and Secure Schools bill, one thing is consistent. It is always followed by an adjective. And that adjective is controversial. It is described as a controversial anti-bullying bill. Members, anti-bullying should not be controversial. No one supports bullying in any form against not just students. We shouldn't have bullying in the workplace either, or in the Minnesota Senate, or anywhere else. So the bill that I bring before you today, the amendment today, is a non-controversial anti-bullying legislation. It is an alternative, members, that has been tested. It's been tested in North Dakota, rated as one of the top 3 inclusive anti-bullying bills in the nation. It has been implemented successfully. And members, it is non-controversial. And so if the members have the A60 amendment in front of them, I would like to also just do a quick run through of what that entails. It's a very short amendment, members. The first section defines bullying, and it has very strict terms, very objective terms. It's severe, pervasive, objectively offensive, substantially interferes or disrupts school, actual and reasonable fear of harm or damage to property. Those are real terms that can be enforced without a legal liability or quagmire. It requires that a local policy, remember that's a big difference, we're talking about a local policy in the amendment before you. It requires a local policy to prohibit student bullying or reprisals on school grounds, related events. It also prohibits false reporting, something essential, and it does cover electronic media. And the policy also includes procedures for reporting, documenting, and investigating alleged acts. And important in this day and age when we're so concerned about data privacy and what is happening with data, the amendment in front of you requires that data on incidents is protected as private, and members, it must be destroyed when the student turns 18 years old or no longer attends school. Essential elements that are missing in the bill before you, but not in this amendment. This amendment covers those. The policy must describe disciplinary measures, require notice to law enforcement officials if there's reason to believe a crime has occurred, and it must include strategies to protect a victim. Another important distinction is that parents of both the alleged bully and the target of bullying must be informed and kept up to date throughout the process. It's essential that parents be a part. Schools must explain this policy to students and personnel who have direct contact with students, and they must post the policy for the public. Bullying prevention programs must be provided, but members, there's a key difference here. The frequency and content is completely determined at the local level, not a new state agency level. Immunity is granted to persons, Members, notice this. There was some misunderstanding about this. Please note, immunity is granted to persons, including volunteers, acting in good faith. Members, it does not create any new civil cause of action. Section 2, very simply, puts the anti-bullying policy to be included in staff development, and Section 3 repeals our current anti-bullying law. So members, I offer this non-controversial, tested, rated, strong anti-bullying policy for your consideration. And I also would draw your attention to 2 items that have been placed on your desk. One is a letter to the editor from the Post Bulletin from an anti-bullying expert. And what she had to say, there's a little bit of her biography, but also what she had to say about this amendment in front of you, the A60, the anti-bullying policy based on the North Dakota model. It's exactly what Minnesota needs. And you can read her concerns about the House File 826 that is before you. So members, I'll bring this to your attention. The other thing I'd like you to note is this particular bill or legislation amendment that I have in front of you has bipartisan support as well. Our own Attorney General Swanson referenced this particular language as a model for what an anti-bullying policy should look like. It's rated by the National Education, Bully Police USA. It gives us this policy an A++. And one final quote, members. According to the Grand Forks Herald, in contrast to the House File 826 in front of you, the North Dakota law, that's the amendment in front of you, members, uses pretty straightforward terms, refreshingly free of legalese, and it may have shown Minnesotans, Republicans, and Democrats alike the way forward. And members, I encourage you to move forward and help enact an anti-bullying policy that we can implement. And that's why I offer this, members, in the spirit of being able to provide a policy that can be implemented. Bullying is a serious problem. We know it has complex causes, but we know it has very definite and very painful consequences for the victims of this behavior. And I do believe that we must strengthen those policies for children in our schools, but members, we must build these protections in a manner that can be done. And we must assist schools to continue to be a part of the solution. But the solutions that we prescribe, they must ultimately be able to be implemented. They must be doable and ultimately successful. And so that is the spirit, members, in which I offer this amendment. I thank you for the opportunity that we're going to have to discuss this amendment, and it is my sincere hope that all of our discussions in the chamber today and throughout our legislative careers are with civility and respect. Members, we must model what we hope to teach. So I would encourage a yes vote on this amendment, Mr. President, and I would call for a roll call. Members, we've heard a lot of discussion today, and I want to make sure that every member in this chamber has the opportunity to read both the A60 amendment, which is what we've been discussing now, and the vote before you, and House File 826. That is the bill on the table here, or on the floor today. And members, make sure that you do your due diligence and actually read the language and the difference between A60 and House File 826. As legislators, we know what fuzzy language looks like, and we know how difficult that is for courts to determine, and we know how difficult that is for our school districts to implement. And let me just share with you a few of the comments from the people that we're going to ask to implement whatever we pass out of this body. One of my superintendents says he welcomes the effort to combat bullying, but he has concerns about the proposal's costs. Another superintendent in my district says, I am completing my 40th year in the field of education as a teacher, coach, principal, and superintendent. I have seen bullying be a temptation for students in each of those 40 years and have been actively involved in all cases of looking for it, observing it, preventing it, and dealing with it. Never at any time did I feel that a state agency was needed, nor did I ever feel that more state reporting would reduce the presence of bullying in the school I served. Speaking today, I can unequivocally state that another state agency and more state reporting is not the answer, and it does little more than put something else on our plates with little or nothing to show for it. That is not an attitude, Carla. That is a statement of fact from years of experience. I would ask all members of the Senate to please author, support, and vote in favor of an amendment. We will fight the battle of bullying equally as passionately with or without a state agency. And I will tell you, all of these things came to me unrequested. They just sent them to me. One of my other superintendents said, we have policies, procedures, tools in place. The bill in front of you does more harm than good. Another superintendent said, I do not believe that a separate school climate center is necessary. In conclusion, I probably should have opened with this because I do believe there are some good things about House File 826, and I apologize that I didn't say that right away. Actually, the good thing about House File 826 is it has created a buzz across this state about the problems with bullying and how severe that is and how we must take a stand that we will stomp out bullying and we will not stand for it as adults, as parents, as educators, as legislators. And that is the good thing in House File 826. But the series of, this is now what the superintendent says, a series of unfunded mandates forces us to address these issues based on how our lawmakers feel we should, are not necessary. I urge you not to pass House File 826 out of committee. It's actually a 2-page letter. Another superintendent emails me, the alternative anti-bullying bill authored by Senators Nelson and Chamberlain provides a vastly improved bill over the one proposed in House File 826 or Senate File 786. In response to the amendment before us, this superintendent says the A60 amendment is a common sense approach that does not require burdensome paperwork and reporting. The definition of bullying is succinct, policies are developed at the local level, and providing information to volunteers as opposed to providing training is more reasonable. I actually think that piece may have been fixed in the Dibble bill, that last piece about volunteers. And I won't go on. I could read to you superintendent after superintendent, school board member after school board member, talking about the problems with the well-intended House File 826. And members, with those comments in mind, and the comments of my constituents, I hope you have listened to yours. Here's my numbers. 39% of my constituents who responded support House File 826. 61% do not. And in regard to the amendment before you, the Stamp Out Bullying Bill, 75% support that, 25% do not. So I encourage you to look at the language in the amendment before you, compare it with the bill, listen to the comments that I hope you were able to gain from your constituents and the stakeholders in the field, and lastly, I ask you to consider the cost. While there is a $1 million price tag to all taxpayers because of this new state bureaucracy called a school climate center, and I do think $1 million is a lot of money, but I will tell you that pales in comparison with the local impact that our local school districts are going to feel. The local impact note from Minnesota Management and Budget says it's $19 million a year that our school districts are going to need to come up with to implement this House File 826. And if you do some math on the back of a napkin, you might figure out that could be about 400 teachers that could have been hired instead. So members, I could go on and on with the documentation about why people are concerned about this approach, the House File 826 approach to a very serious problem. And I would ask for consideration and support on Amendment A60, which provides that common sense, local control, no unfunded mandate, very implementable, doable, rated, trusted, bipartisanly supported, stamp out bullying. Thank you, Mr. President. Those of you who sit on the tax committee with me will recognize this particular initiative. In our tax committee just this week, we had another bill, much smaller bill, actually a bill that I support, but anyway, a smaller bill that had a similar Section 1, one that was like legislative purpose and intent. And it was very instructive. I learned a lot in that committee, as I always do. Love that tax committee. The chair of the Tax Reform Committee made an amendment very similar to the one in front of you today. The comments were, I support your bill, but in the statutes we try to let the statute itself speak to the purpose. And so we don't usually include, and in fact we have moved away from including policy statements or purpose statements. And so the chair of the Tax Reform Committee went on to say, well, I don't disagree with anything. I'm going to move to delete Section 1, Subdivision 1. It does nothing to the program that you are supporting, but it does take the policy language out. It's not needed. And our tax chair affirmed that that was correct, and that he went on to say the language of the bill should speak for itself. We try to not include purpose statements. And actually the author of the bill then agreed that Section 1, deleting Section 1 was a friendly amendment, and we took it out in tax committee on a different bill. And so members, I believe that that was good counsel from our tax chair and our tax reform chair, and I do believe that Section 1, which is the legislative purpose and intent, and House File 826, is not necessary. We don't put these kinds of descriptors into legislation. In fact, I agree with the tax chair. The language of the bill should speak for itself. And so members, I ask for a green vote that we do not include purpose statements. It is not the place of legislation to do that. So members, I ask for a green vote and a roll call, please. Thank you. But I do think it's important that members realize that even though it's very clear that our practice is not to have legislative purpose and intent written into legislation, and that's something that we have tried to avoid and stripped out at every opportunity. I will say, though, this reference to the United States Supreme Court precedent and the Tinker precedent, it's not even recorded correctly in this legislation here in front of us. Specifically, the words that the Supreme Court used were, and let me just read it to you. The court held that in order for school officials to justify censoring speech, they must be able to show, this is all in quotes now, that their action was caused by something more than a mere desire to avoid the discomfort and unpleasantness that always accompanies an unpopular viewpoint. Then they went on to say that allowing schools to forbid conduct that would, now this is in quotes, materially and substantially interfere with the requirements of appropriate discipline in the operation of the school. That is allowed. But members, that's not what is written here on page 1. Lines 1.16, this is not even a correct reference. Lines 1.14 through 1.17 reference a Supreme Court precedent, and then they say it involves plainly offensive conduct that improperly interferes with the rights of other students and the work or discipline of the school. That's not even what the Supreme Court said. So members, this is just not even drafted correctly, even if you believe that somehow we should suddenly stick in legislative purpose and intent. I do support the Bonoff oral amendment. I also support the concept that the people on the ground, the feet on the ground, the folks working with our children know best. So while I support this oral amendment, I would hope that all who do are consistent in their view and in their belief that it is the local people, the local control, the professionals that are working with our students and our children who can best determine, in this case, when it comes to being able to defend oneself from a bullying charge, whether or not they should be able to confront the witnesses. That's a difficult decision. It does depend upon what the situation is. And I will say that very same logic should apply to this entire bill, which is why I think many of us will not support this bill today, because it is a state mandated. All those decisions are made up at the state bureaucracy instead of with the locals. So this particular oral amendment is one that actually rightfully puts those decisions with the local professionals that are working with our students. Certainly, we would expect when there has already been an incident and there's any type of resources that appear to be of value, it would be essential that the parents give consent about what those resources are. Those resources that are outside the normal purview, particularly of the school district. It's essential that parents be involved, and we all know that parent involvement is key to student success and achievement. And when a student is being faced with either being bullied or being accused of being a bully, there is never a time that they would need their parent or parents' involvement more. And so this is a very common sense, parent involvement, child-friendly, student-friendly amendment. I would encourage a yes vote on this. You know, I'm just going to talk about 5 C's. Really, it all boils down to that today. You know, let's be clear. Nobody should be bullied anywhere at any time. And that's good that Minnesota has focused on this conversation. And no, we will not stand for any type of bullying. But the real question is, as one of the former superintendents said, the question is, what's the best way to get there? How do we get there? And that brings me to the second C, and that's about control. Most of us, many of us, believe that our local officials, our school board members, our elected school board members, and our superintendents, and our administrators, and our teachers, and those who we live and work with, and we trust our children to, we think they have a better handle and a better way to work with these complex issues that do have very serious consequences. So it's a matter of how. And I believe that that local control is a much better mechanism than a state-mandated agency, a 23-member, I think it's called the School Climate Council, although we did change part of the bill. Instead of having a school climate center, now we have something else, but I'm kind of reminded by that Shakespeare quote, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. So I think it's still the School Climate Center. It just has a different name as of one of our changes today. But the point is that 23-member appointed School Climate Council is going to establish the norms. I find that scary. There's no accountability there. There's no transparency with community members, staff, teachers, parents. I think that is very scary. So we're moving the wrong way when it comes to really how best to solve this problem. We're actually moving it away. We're moving it up here to St. Paul. I think it belongs in our local cities and towns and school districts. That's where we can truly get things done. I'm reminded of one of my superintendents who said we have local policies, local tools, local procedures. He even went on to say, we think this law will make things worse. I think this is not a good option that we have in front of us today. That brings me to the third C, and that's about costs, members. Well, we've talked about the $1 million cost to our general fund. Actually, we put in $1 million last year, even though the School Climate Center didn't exist yet. But we're putting in $1 million every year of state taxpayer money for this new state agency called the School Climate Center, or whatever its new name is as of this afternoon. And yet, really, the real costs are with our local school districts all across this state. $19 million a year of local impact to our local school districts. How many teachers would that be? Are we looking at 400 teachers? Are we looking at a reading teacher? A school counselor? 400 teachers that now we're saying St. Paul knows how to spend the money better than you do. I think that's a mistake. And lastly, members, I'm thinking about my constituents, that 5th C. Like I said, I've never had results like this. 39% support the bill that we're going to vote on right now. 61% oppose the state-mandated one-size-fits-all, top-down, untested, untried experiment. However, 75% supported the more local control option, the tested, tried, bipartisan North Dakota model that was voted down earlier today, that does not come with a $19 million price tag, by the way. But there were 25% who were opposed to that. But I've never seen my constituents so adamantly opposed to something like this. And as I will say, I have visited with school districts all across my district, school board members. There's been no support for this bill. So I would encourage members to, let's add a 5th or a 6th C, and let's think about your conscience and clarity here. Let's think about, we know what fuzzy language looks like, and I'll tell you, 826 has a lot of fuzzy language in it. So let's do what legislators should do, and let's vote this down. Let's come back and try and get a policy that's actually going to work for all of our kids and for all of our districts, and not be this heavy-handed top-down approach.